Good evening, everyone. We'll just join in in 1 more minute. Okay, we might start since we have a little bit of introduction, and that will allow more of our participants to join us. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining from wherever you are. Please note that tonight's session is being recorded and all mics and cameras are off. If you have any questions, please use the chat function. My name is Elham. I'm from Brisbane South PHN, and I am the Multicultural Program Coordinator here. Tonight we are joined by two Auslan interpreters, Heather and Kerry. They will be switching every 15 minutes between each other. We also have two lovely presenters from AMPARO, Jenny Ryan and Venencia Niagara. I hope I have pronounced the names correctly. I give a quick bio. Venencia is born in Burundi from Central Africa. She was a refugee in Tanzania, East Africa for 12 years prior to coming to Australia in 2005. Her experience in disability area began in 2017 with AMPARO Advocacy as bicultural community education worker, informing the community about what disability is in the Australian context, as well as promoting NDIS. She worked with NDIA on the pilot project of the National Community Connectors Program as a community liaison officer. Her current role is again with AMPARO Advocacy, this time as a multicultural engagement worker. She also works casually as a bicultural worker with Queensland Transcultural Mental Health Centre. Welcome, Venencia. Our second presenter is Jenny Ryan. Jenny has worked in the multicultural sector for 30 years. First as an English as a second language teacher, and then as a cultural diversity coordinator at the Mater Health. She began working in disability sector 2 years ago as a coordinator of information and linkage and capacity building project at AMPARO Advocacy. She has had personal lived experience as a carer for a family member with disability who was an arm amputee and chronic pain sufferer with severe depressive disorder. Welcome to the two of you.
Thanks, Helen. And welcome everyone who's tuned in to us this evening. It's my first experience, and maybe Venanci's too, of doing an after-hours session. And it's a good challenge for us also to be mindful of having the Auslan interpreters, given we're talking about communicating effectively. So it's great experience. So I'll just move along and start. Sorry, get rid of with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land where we're gathered here this evening. Benazzi and I are in South Brisbane, where it's the Yagara and Turrbal people are the traditional owners, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. Okay, so tonight the title of our presentation is Towards Better Practice, Working with Participants from Culturally and Linguistically Diverse, the acronym CALD, backgrounds. Just to make sure that you're at the right webinar. Okay, so as Ellen introduced us, we're both from AMPARO Advocacy, and those of you who know us, we're a little NGO. The office is at Gaythorne, and it's a non-profit organisation that's governed by a voluntary management committee, and it's interesting to note that the majority of whom are people from CALD backgrounds with disability. And so AMPARO Advocacy is very much about human rights, and believes that people from a CALD background with disability have the same right to live valued, inclusive lives. But however, societal responses to people with disability can be inadequate and harmful. And therefore, independent advocacy is needed to address social and economic isolation, unfair treatment and discrimination at the individual and systemic level. I think AMPARO Advocacy turns 20 next year, and I can attest to the passionate and fierce advocates that work there, and two of them are long-term, at least 15 years, as is Maureen, the manager. AMPARO has also seen the huge difference that the NDIS has made since its introduction in 2018. So it's witnessed a significant improvement for those people who can access NDIS to living a better life. So tonight we want to explore the challenges experienced by CALD background people living with disability, including NDIS participants. So you'd be familiar with the fact that anybody who accesses the NDIS is referred to as a participant. We want to explore how service providers, and that's many of you who maybe can better deliver quality supports, and we'll spend quite a bit of time looking at culturally responsive communication, which is mostly around working with interpreters. So to get us thinking and engaged a bit, I'd like you to put into the chat what percentage of people living in Queensland were born overseas. So you can just enter it into the chat, please. Someone saying 5. 25. 40. 45. Okay. So the percentage of people born overseas living in Queensland is 28.9%. So Judy, you might be the winner there, I think, with 25%. Okay, next question. What percentage of people living in Queensland speak a language other than English at home? So keeping in mind that 28.9% are born overseas, what percentage speak a language other than English at home? Can you enter that into the chat, please? $35. $35. Okay. 15. We've got, okay, interesting. 35 and 50. Okay. So the answer to that one is 18.8%. Now, if you're in the Metro South region, maybe I'm pretty sure it's not 50%, but it could, I'm sure it's higher than 18.8%. These stats are for across Queensland. So, okay, next question. What percentage of permanent arrivals to Queensland in 2019-20 were humanitarian entrants? So another, you might know them as refugees. So if you can enter that into the chat, please. %. 5%. Okay. Right. So the answer to that one is 7.1%. So those who was, well, the one who said 6%, that's the most, that's closest. Well done. Okay. All right. So this question. So what percentage of people with disability living in Queensland come from homes where a language other than English is spoken? So that's for 0 to 65. What percentage of people with disability living in Queensland come from homes where a language other than English is spoken? 8%, 8%. Any more? Okay. Great. Okay, well, someone's getting very precise with 4.3%. Okay, so it's 15.6%. So bearing that in mind, this next question, what percentage of NDIS participants living in Queensland come from CALD backgrounds? So we've heard that 15.6% of people with what percentage come from of NDIS participants? So those people who are accessing the NDIS, 3%, 3%, 5, 3. Yep, pretty good guesses. Okay, and the answer is 5.4%. So essentially that tells you that they're very much underrepresented, and that figure hasn't changed for a long time. So it's sat at that figure despite the enormous advocacy from AMPARO and other types of organisations for a number of years now. We're hoping that the new CALD strategy that is to be brought into effect sometime later this year may see a shift in that, an increase. Okay, so what do the statistics tell us? Clearly, there's substantial CALD populations in Queensland, including CALD people with disability. And again, in Metro South, where you're coming from, that's even higher than those general Queensland stats. That there are significant numbers of new settlers in Queensland who come from refugee backgrounds. And whilst there was some disruption during COVID, those numbers are still significant, and they're of course have started again. And that CALD people with disability are underrepresented in accessing the NDIS. So I just like Vanazzi now, who's willing, and I'm really mindful of the difficulties that some people can experience when sharing their refugee experience story, but Vanazzi has offered to do this for us, so I'll hand it to Vanazzi.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I just want to provide some ideas about what difference it makes about coming as a refugee or coming as a migrant to Australia. I'm personally a refugee, and I was in a refugee for 12 years, as you have heard in the introduction. And I fled my country because of the war. And so when we see the reason why there are migrants and refugees, we all understand, obviously, that refugees are forced to leave their country, while migrants are not. Sometimes they plan. And for refugees, most of the times you go to the new place without anything at all, including losing your family members, including, getting, being harmed, suffer physically, emotionally. And then the refugee place, there's a lot of stressful situations that people go through. There is no hope for the better future, because the refugee life is like, you get support just to survive. You cannot plan for life, because you can't plan to study, you can't plan to work, because sometimes you have wrong expectations that I'll be going home, but it's not done. I'll be going back to my country, it's not done. So you have no hope, really hope for better future. And comparatively to migrants, most of the refugees, depending on how long you stay in the refugee place, you don't get enough skills like migrants. And because most of the skills are gained through education. So in the refugee camps, most of the time there is no education. For a few cases, there is primary education. Very few cases, there may be high secondary, like a high school education, but not everywhere. So you can count, like, for my personal experience, I was in a refugee camp when I was still young, and my expectation was to finish the highest education I could achieve with the help from my family members. But I lost most of the family members, and I didn't have that capacity to achieve the goals that I had since my childhood. So coming to Australia was the biggest chance I got. Yes, I had some more expectations for better life, but how old was I when I came here? And you can imagine how many things I lost. Emotional loss, like when you come here, you are already married, which was my case. You already have a big family. There are a few expectations to achieve comparatively to a migrant who left their country, coming to increase their skills. They know what they need. They know what like the process. But for me, yes, I'm lucky to be in Australia, but there are a lot of things, because of the time I spent in the refugee camp, there are a lot of things I cannot catch up with. I know I've been personally asked by some people, oh, did you do this? And then they don't know what is going on with me, like my past, what I have experienced as a refugee girl, as a refugee woman. So I have children. Now I have less chances to think of myself. I think of my children first, because my age is a limit for me to achieve some of the things I thought I would have achieved before I fled my country. So there are a lot of things going on with refugee. In the refugee life, we have a lot of emotional loss. We have a lot of physical, loss. We have a lot of, there are a lot of things as a refugee. You just even give up because it may be too late for you to do. And you deal with different things. So that is there are a lot of things to talk about. Migrant experience and refugee experience, but those are the few things I can share with you tonight, speaking of myself as a refugee woman. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinati. And I think Vinati and I were just talking before we started, and that I think the difference, that I hadn't thought about before for, say, a migrant woman coming and a refugee woman coming is all that emotional burden potentially that a refugee woman brings with her that takes a long time to resolve and work through. Whereas if you've come as a migrant, which is by choice, and it's possibly as, different opportunities that you're experiencing here, it's quite a different position. The starting position is how I'd describe it. Often have the language as a migrant, whereas as a refugee, you don't have the language. So there's so much, I think, that we possibly, and I, even though I've been working with people of a humanitarian background for 30 years, that I still take for granted and not think about when I'm working with people from a refugee experience. So in your work, I suppose the best thing is just to be mindful of people's previous experience and how that may be impacting them when they're interacting with you. And also, I think, ask questions, but be really respectful in how you ask those questions. Be mindful. Yeah.
That's true.
And there's plenty you can read about, of course, too. There's some wonderful books that you can read. Thanks, Vinati. So we'll continue on. Vinati can continue to talk to this because these are her own personal experiences, but it's also the experiences she has in working with people as a multicultural engagement worker and the types of barriers that they're experiencing each day.
Oh, thanks, Jenny. There are a number of barriers that cause the underrepresentation of people from the CALD background to access disability services. And most of them are cultural barriers, including the language, which for me is the main one. Because with the language, there are a lot of things that people could, like, there are a lot of other barriers that people could break. But then the language plays a big role in like living life here and accessing services, quality services. So when it comes to the language, a lot of people came with no English skills, speaking or writing. So considering that English is the main language here in this country, so some people and from back home in our countries, majority of people who came adults did not go to school even in their country, which means even those few who could make it to go to school, they don't know English, because for some people, like my country, before we came here, English was only learned from year 8, which means they are able to talk their mother tongue and the other small languages, the Swahili, for people who live like in Tanzania, for instance. So when you don't have the main language used in a place like Australia, is a huge barrier for you to navigate some systems, for you to understand some of the main important things you have to understand. So another barrier, especially when it comes to disability, is the stigma people have around disability, because disability concept is something that is really complex. And some of the countries in the CALD background, they don't have specific words to explain disability. So when it comes to speaking about disability in the Australian context, it becomes very complex. And some of them, they don't understand how they could explain it. And some of them with the stigma, because the way disability is understood in some CALD background, it's like a person with disability is useless. A person with disability should not be supported because they will not be able to help the families. So when we come here, some families, they say, if I say that I have a person with disability, how will other people understand me? How will other people respect me? So it requires a lot of efforts to let people know that they deserve to get help, they deserve to get supported. It's not easy to break that. And, you know, another issue is like the understanding the system in Australia. A lot of people have difficulties to understand how the systems work, including health systems, disability services, and some of the people in the families are confused. You may approach a family and then you tell them about maybe a child with disability. You tell them that there are services around, but then they may not disclose that they have a child with disability because they fear. They don't understand what the difference of, for instance, child safety and disability services. Some of them will think, oh, if I say that I have a child with disability, maybe child safety will take the child away from our family. So they prefer not to discuss about that because they are not sure what the outcome of being known as a family with a child with disabilities. And another issue is some families with children with disabilities, they don't understand when they come to Australia. They have no idea prior to coming to Australia about which services exist for who. Like, is there services typical for people with disabilities? So coming with no such ideas is also a barrier because it becomes confusing, and so they just doubt what they should go for and what they should not go for. So I think they need, like, they don't have safety in making choices of what they should disclose or not. Yeah. So, and also we need to know that with disability, people also, there is taboo around disabilities because not only the person with disability, but even the family, they think that that is something that is within the family. It's not individual. Maybe it's a punishment. The parents have been punished, especially the mothers. So all these stuff, cultural barriers, they create unsafety for people to accept services, to disclose disability, to accept, to discuss about disability and all those issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And look, every 6 months we are capturing the barriers to access, and it endlessly comes up all of these issues. So you could read about these in pretty much reports that are written certainly by AMPARO often, and it seems to be that I sometimes wonder what will make the change in terms of it no longer being considered a stigma, and where if a parent did feel that their child may have global developmental delay, at which point in their length of stay in Australia that they would be ready to have some early childhood intervention. It's not to say everybody doesn't, of course not, but these are the types of barriers that we see in our work. And it's no longer going forward. Okay, so one of the ways to address that is that at AMPARO they received funding for what's called an information linkages and capacity building project. And its aims is to, as you can see there, to increase knowledge of disability in the Australian context, because as Venazzi said, disability is may not be recognised as a concept even. There's often no language for it. And people who are in the health who are listening to us would be familiar with palliative care being another type of context in which there is no word for palliative care. I remember when I was at the Mater and they do the postnatal depression, the Edinburgh test, and women would say, what's postnatal depression? Again, not having any concept of what that is. our project also aims to assist people to understand the rights of participants with disability and how to exercise their rights, to increase their expectations for what a good life can look like. Again, as Vinazzi said, often people, if they've arrived in Australia with a disability, they may think that this is as good as it gets, that there is there's nothing else that they should be having to assist them to live a good life with their disability. We support people to increase their awareness of mainstream and specialist disability services, including accessing the NDIS. We worked to increase capacity to exercise choice and control. That's quite a difficult thing to do, but and takes time and requires a lot of trust building. And then to support people living with disability to connect with their own peers from their community. So they're the aims of the project. And just to say quickly, we can send a link at the end of this, but if you're working with people from a CALD background who are living with disability, who you feel could do with support to achieve any of those aims, then you're able to make a referral to our project, and I'll send that with Ellen later. Okay, and just a quick snapshot of who we've been working with and across Queensland. So we're in Cairns, Townsville, Toowoomba, Brisbane and Logan. So 90% of the individuals are born overseas in more than 25 different countries. And there's a broad range of countries there that you can see. They obviously speak a similar number of languages, 26, and we really struggle with some of those new and emerging languages, for example, in Toowoomba with Kurdish Kamunji and in Townsville with Sango, for anyone who may be from those areas. Need for interpreters. 75% of the people we work with require an interpreter. Yeah, so that's just a snapshot of who we are working with. And this story now, which I will share, is just really captures what Vinazzi was talking about with regards the stigma that can be associated with disability in some communities. So this is a Vietnamese mum sharing her story.
I have a boy, he's nearly 15 now, and he has Down syndrome. I have a lot of issue of stigma and discrimination about like my family, about my son, like a disabled boy. For example, like when we first meet someone, like in the Vietnamese people, they always like advise me, like the boy's life thanks to the mom's morals, and the girls is from like thanks from the dad. So try to live better, like do more charity and like helping people. You do a lot of good things. So it had to reduce your son bad karma, something like that. Yeah. And I have another example. Like last year, when I took my son to work at Springvale for shopping, and we were waiting at the daily counter to get our stuff. And there's a Vietnamese lady, she's like the same as my mom's. She started to look at my son, and after that she asked, is this boy has disease or something? I tried to like pretend like I'm not Vietnamese, I don't understand. But after that she keep going, like just try to stare him and try to ask again, like, this boy have the face not normal as not like someone else, and I'm speechless. But my son suddenly he just told me, Mom, is she Vietnamese? She speaking Vietnamese. And like at the time, I just took him home straight away. And yeah, I feel really, really like heartbroken. Sometimes he asking me why people look at me like something like that. Like because the Vietnamese culture, I think is different from another country. Because Vietnam is a developing country as well. So Vietnamese people think like someone like did a really bad thing or wrong thing in the previous life. So that's why this life, like I have a boy like disabled like that. And that's the reason why all the Vietnamese disabled kids, like infants as well, the mom and the dad of family, when they found out, or the doctor just said, your child like not normal or something, they just left at the hospital. And there's a lot of disabled children in Vietnam like were abandoned at hospital, churches, temples, and essential for orphan and disabled children. It's really like we're not comfortable. Almost the Vietnamese parents with special children really not comfortable to like access any service because somebody just worry about the face, the family's reputation.
Might be it. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, but I think, and you'll receive the link to this video or this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to go back in and have a look at that. But I think that story really exemplifies what Venazzi was saying and what we do experience. And that whilst the underrepresentation is to the NDIS is related to some of the systemic barriers, it's also some of the own cultural barriers of people and families not wanting to disclose. So some of the other challenges for CALD participants are, there's an assumption that people have access to the internet and computers and levels of English and computer literacy to be able to navigate the NDIS. The NDIS and services failing to provide interpreters and translated information or employ staff who can speak the participants' language, and I hear of that quite a bit in terms of interpreters certainly not being provided and plans not being translated, even though they should be. No support to prepare and effectively participate in NDI planning meetings, which can result in poor plans that cannot meet people's needs. So again, with the multicultural engagement workers, they spend quite a bit of time with people preparing them for a pre-planning meeting so that they can get an optimal plan. There can be a lack of support to undertake reviews of poor plans. So someone may have received an NDIS plan and it's not adequate, but they don't really know how to navigate the system to be able to get a review of that plan. And NDIS plans not being implemented due to inadequate or no funding for support coordination. So one of the things we always ensure that people that we work with, that there is funding for support coordination. That's really important. Some of the other challenges is inadequate support to connect to culturally competent, safe NDIS providers that can deliver culturally appropriate quality services. There's a major shortage of skilled, experienced and culturally competent staff across all areas. And sometimes services are overcharging through poor financial management or intentional fraud or ceasing involvement when the money runs out. So these are the types of challenges that we experience in people we work with. just having a look at, this is the NDIS Safeguards and Quality Commission's website for making a complaint. So imagine if you, if that was, say, in Arabic, if you're not an Arabic speaker and you were trying to navigate that, near impossible. So we have raised that with the Commission as to how they need to make that much more accessible. But it just really exemplifies, I suppose, the complexity and the difficulties that exist in accessing it. Other challenges, and you'd be well aware of this coming from health, navigating the health system. Because there's a real need for being able to have health literacy and know who you need to see to get the medical evidence and so forth. Social isolation is another big factor for people living with disability. We've really experienced one of our biggest issues in the last 2 years has been the lack of permanent housing. And also navigating Services Australia. So we work with a lot of people, supporting them to access the disability support pension, for example. So these are some of the other challenges that we find. Okay, I'll let Vanazzi talk now about some of the strategies that she would employ when she's working with people.
Thanks, Jenny. Some of the strategies but are not limited to, having a holistic understanding of a participant, main issues, their strengths, their limitations, and work collaboratively to address issues holistically. We come across situations where a participant and their family are involved with a number of service providers, but then the service providers just provide a piece of work separately with no collaboration. So it becomes really difficult because of some of the cultural barriers, including language, the family may not even understand who is doing what. So at a certain time, they become confused. But when services come together and they collaborate and they have holistic understanding of the person's issues, their needs, their strengths, so I think that they can understand who should do what, and then all the issues can be addressed appropriately. And when stakeholders collaborate and identify meaningful opportunities for participants and their families, they can enable the family and the people with disabilities to meet their needs in a better way, quick way, and then they get what they need easily. And partnership between services around help of program and other opportunities could help to benefit participants and their families. There are a lot of families, because they don't have understanding of some of the opportunities that could result in a better life for people with disabilities. They need help, but then if service providers don't help to identify meaning opportunities. Let's, for instance, say a person with disability would like to learn English. They need English literacy, but then no one in the family can have an opportunity to find out where a service who provide the English literacy is. So, but services, when they know where, for instance, a service where they provide English literacy or citizenship literacy, so they may have an opportunity, instead of going to the parks every day, as the way they spend the money, NDIS money, if they could spend some time going to English class, that's really helpful for them. But you find some people with the good money and good funding in the NDIS package, they always go to parks because they don't know where other opportunities might be, helpful opportunities. So it's good for us to support families in that way, help them identify some meaningful opportunities for a better life. And promoting a meaningful community connection for isolated people with disabilities is another way. We found people with disabilities who are, for some reasons, are isolated, either from their family members or for their community. It's not easy because we can't choose for them to be connected to the community. But if we discuss with them deeply and explain to them how beneficial it is, they may accept and they may embrace the ideas. I believe that I know that some people, for some negative experience they had with their community members or back home, they may not at all accept to be connected with their community members, but it's good for us to tell them, to discuss with them that about as an option. We never know. So whenever they are ready, then they go for it. It has been helping for a lot of people with disabilities and their families who felt lonely and didn't know about important opportunities in the community.
Thanks, Vanazzi.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, and obviously the importance of positive language. So as we've talked about, there's no word for disability in many languages, and there's a really good guide that I have there that you'll be able to look at later on about, you know, being mindful of the language that you're using when working with people with disability. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so we're going to move now. We're not going to be able to watch Shahram's story, but I really encourage you to. So he's one of the members of AMPARO's management committee, and it's a really positive story about Shahram since he arrived in Australia, and he lives with vision impairment, and it's a great story. So I encourage you to take the time to watch it later. Okay, so we'll move on to the NDIS and interpreters. And so just to know that the NDIS Act has a policy that communicating with people with disability highlight the need for information to be provided in the language and mode of communication in terms which the participant with disability is most likely to understand. So there's access to interpreters for registered service providers. So there's funding through TIS National. It's not part of the participants' plan. However, funding for Auslan interpreters is part of the participants' plan. And that support coordinators and other NDIS registered service providers can access TIS National for free. So they should never say, no, we can't access TIS National. Yes, they can. They just may not have gone to the trouble of setting up the TIS code and so forth, which is very easy to do. So know that they can, or they should, and that there's no limit placed on how often participants can access TIS National. And this is also really important, that the NDI should also translate the participants' plan if that's needed. So I was visiting a family in Cairns, and the plan had been put in the cupboard because it arrived in English and they had no idea what it said. I'd be really curious, I ask often, but I haven't been able to find out, what is the underspend of people's plans who require an interpreter? I'd be so curious about that. Okay, so why are interpreters necessary? Seeing it's 20 past, I probably won't show this video given the time, but again, I really encourage you to have a look at this video. It's set in an antenatal clinic, and some people may have already seen it, but it's where the interpreter, so there isn't an interpreter, unfortunately. The husband is interpreting for his wife, and he's withholding information so he's not interpreting accurately. And for anyone who has worked with family members acted as interpreters, I'd be really keen for you to watch that. Ellen, do you think I should show it?
No, there's one question which I thought is pertinent to this topic at the moment. Judy has asked a question: what about interpreter access for many providers who are not registered providers?
Yes. So it would be at their expense, the provider. So so it is only for registered providers. And that is an issue. So I'll keep going, Ellen. Yep. Okay. All right. So I know we have Patricia in the audience, and she's been adding some very invaluable chat there. Thank you, Patricia. So she could talk more to what is a certified interpreter. So I would just simply say, rather than read that, that it is a profession, and it's not anybody can be an interpreter. And in fact, I think the pass rate to become a certified interpreter is not that high because of the difficulty in becoming a professional interpreter. So do know it is a profession and not just anybody who can become one. And there's an accreditation authority, NATI. It's really hard to know how many people know a little bit, and say there's people who may know a lot. So forgive me for skipping over it if you don't know that much, but there's plenty of information on the slides that you'll be able to go back to later. And if you want to put some questions in the chat for at the end, please do. Okay, so assessing the need for an interpreter. Don't just ask, do you need an interpreter? Because sometimes people feel embarrassed about maybe requiring an interpreter. They may not know it's free. They may think that their English is better than the complex conversation that you might be about to have with them. So the best way to assess the need for an interpreter is to give some information. For example, if you're in allied health and you're speaking to them about, say, in speech therapy, a diagnosis, if you then ask them to paraphrase that back to you. If they can't, then they require an interpreter. And just to save any embarrassment, I've never had people refuse except for those who have had an experience where an interpreter hadn't kept confidentiality. Again, rarely that happens, but they insisted that they not have the on-site interpreter that had been booked, but they wanted a phone interpreter from interstate. So people, I find, generally are really grateful to have an interpreter engaged for them. And it's often your responsibility to find out their need for an interpreter. Okay, and to remember that a participant's reading and writing skills may not reflect their oral skills in English. So a person might be able to read quite well and to write, but they don't have the oral skills. Am I right in that? And vice versa. And then older people with acquired brain injury, dementia, or some other medical conditions, or people who have experienced trauma may lose their English skills in stressful situations. And if during the meeting you're concerned about lack of understanding, you can stop and engage a phone interpreter because they are available on demand 24/7. And we're about to test that theory shortly when we actually access an interpreter. Okay, so if you find you're working in a service or you're dealing with a service that doesn't have access to TIS, it's very easy to set up a TIS account. And so this slide is in the presentation, and it's in there about how to apply to register for a TIS national client code. I'm not going to talk too much about who has access. I know Ellen said, can you include about the fact that in 2022, allied health professionals across Australia now have access to free TIS interpreting. Again, I think we'll just make sure that the link is there for you to refer to, because I'm not entirely sure who that applies to, unless Ellen wants to add anything in the chat now. Okay, and there are different modes of interpreting. So there's on-site, which is the preferred mode, but needs to be pre-booked, obviously. And that's the preferred mode for complex, longer situations. Telephone interpreting is good for short, like if it's 15 minutes or less, or you need it now and you weren't aware. So that's, or for people who may be uncomfortable about having an on-site or having a video and prefer that further distance by having a telephone. Thankfully, video interpreting became more common during COVID, and so that's now widely available. And so it means that it opens up the numbers of interpreters who are available across the country, particularly in new and emerging languages. So some of the multicultural engagement workers have been working with video interpreting, and it's a much preferred mode than just using telephone. Okay, so things to consider before organising an interpreter. I'll let Vanazzi talk to that.
Thank you, Jenny. First of all, it's good to find out what language or what dialect the person is comfortable with most with. Because in some communities, they have some languages, but in some, you might find that a community have a lot of dialects. And every tribe might have their own dialect. So if you don't ask prior to bringing an interpreter in, you might find that you have like taken into account a general language that the person might not be comfortable with because they prefer a specific dialect of their tribe. So it's good to make sure you know what dialect they are comfortable with and they understand better. Another thing is that sometimes people might say, oh, they are good at interpreting in certain language, but they don't use the specific words that people are expecting to hear from them due to different reasons. Some people, like younger people who grew up in Australia, may not know the exact words that other people would like to hear and understand because they grew up here and they don't know in their culture how some specific words are said for people who grew up in the country to understand. So it's good to find out. Sometimes it's difficult, but it's good for you to be aware of that when you see that there's a misunderstanding between a person and an interpreter. And there are preference around the gender. Some women might prefer to have female interpreters, while others we say it's okay, anybody can come. And some people might prefer a person according to when they came to Australia. Some people say, okay, a person who has recently arrived in Australia, I don't want them to help me because they don't trust them. And you find that in some small communities, people know each other. And when they bring an interpreter, she will refuse to talk. So I say, no, I know the person. She can't help me. So there are a lot of choice around interpreters. And a person might be reluctant to use an interpreter because they don't trust the capacity of an interpreter. Maybe they are, how much they are skilled. So it's good for service providers to assure the people that they will get certified interpreters because some people are not aware of the qualifications that interpreters have to gain. So it's good for people to be told about what qualifications interpreters get to make sure that they trust that they will get a quality service. And other people are worried about the confidentiality. There have been few cases where, by mistake, people hear what they have told interpreters. So it's good to encourage them that if they happen to know that the confidentiality has been breached, to report or to complain. A lot of people have fear to do that because of many reasons. Some of them say, I know the people who helped me, and if I complain and they happen to know, then it will be not safe for me. But it's always good to let people know that they should do that to protect like other people, not to have to go through the same experience. And it's good also to allow enough time to people, because when there is not enough time for people to discuss with interpreters, to discuss with service providers and interpreters, sometimes they don't get the whole concept of what you discussed about, and they have some stress, some pressure. Then you ask them, what happened? I didn't understand. So it's good to allow time for people to understand what has been spoken. And if possible, it's good to ask them, so what did we discuss about today? To make sure that they know what happened and they know what is next. Yeah. Some tips. Before engaging an interpreter and, before the session between service provider, interpreter, and the person, it's good to brief, to provide a briefing to the interpreter about what will be discussed about and what is the context today. For instance, if an interpreter comes in and they don't know whether it is an intake session, where there will be a couple of questions about the family, who is in the family, things like that. What is the disability you have? It's different from when they understand that this is a planning meeting, for instance, because like in NDIS, with NDIS concept, there are some words, some terminologies that people always expect to use when they know that there's a planning meeting. For instance, in the planning meeting, people will always be asked about their personal goals to achieve a better life. So an interpreter might come, they don't know if it is about a planning meeting. It happens sometimes when you say goal. What are your goals? And an interpreter who didn't understand if it is about a planning meeting, they will understand that it's a girl. So having the concept, having the understanding of what is going to be discussed can help interpreters like overcome some barriers, like, because it happens. It is just normal. It's not the interpreter's fault. When you say goal and then they hear girl, it happens. So when they, prior to the to helping a person, they know this is a planning meeting. For sure, they will know that goals will be spoken about. So they will not be confused about girl and goal. That's just a simple example. So when they understand, they will be prepared for some specific terminologies, like NDIS related terminologies. Then there will be an effective communication between the service provider, the interpreter, and the person. And it's good to explain clearly your role, because people always have different service providers coming, and some of them don't have capacity to know who is that, what are they doing. So when people understand your role, it will be easy for them to communicate their needs. It will be easy for the interpreter also to help out with your communication. And it's not good to use some jargon or acronyms, because some interpreters, depending on their experience, how often they help people, they may not be able to assist if you use jargon in helping people. So, and the victim will be the person, because some people, they may not even ask when they are confused, or they'll say yes, yes, and you will never know whether your message is got or not. And it's always good to ask, to tell the interpreter when they don't get or they don't understand the message, to clarify from you, because some interpreters will just assume what you said, and to make it easy for themselves, they just talk, and the person they are supporting will never know whether they are getting the right message or not. So it's good to tell the interpreters to ask for clarification when they get confused, when they don't understand exactly what you say. Yeah. And it's good also to provide an opportunity for people to have a choice of on-site or face-to-face interpreter, because some people, they will think, oh, if I request a specific interpreter face-to-face, they think I'm demanding. And a lot of families don't want to be judged that they are demanding.
Okay. I think there's a lot of tips there, and that was only before. And then there's during, and then there's after. So again, I'm conscious of the time. So, and I think it's more important that we demonstrate actually connecting to an interpreter, and that you're able to read these tips yourself. But I think that one that we have here during the meeting, regularly check for understanding, is really key. So there's no point in getting to the end of an hour's consultation or some sort of an assessment and then checking in whether they understood. So it's really your responsibility to continue to check for understanding. And the best way to do that is through like what they can call teach back. So it's just paraphrasing back to you what you'd told them. And I think it's important also that you keep control of the interview. The interpreter's not in control, you are. So you need to make sure that, you know, it's your responsibility to take charge. Benazzi was...
Yeah, there is a question that when you ask a person, you may get that overall that they got the message. You can ask, do you have any question today? So some people might come with a question out of what you discussed. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah. This question is so helpful to understand that the person got the message and you got the message from them. So if you are, do you have any question today? Then from what they ask, we can get an understanding that everything went well.
And I see Ellen's put in there that teach back technique, which is really great. Okay, and then I think we'll just, sometimes I seem to get stuck a little bit more there, as we talked about, avoid jargon, keep your sentences short and pause often. You would think that these are really no-brainers, but I must admit I was in healthcare for a long time, and sometimes I would see the best and the worst examples coming from, you know, doctors and specialists working with interpreters. So there is a skill, and it's important to practice it also. Okay, so let's just go to booking an interpreter. So I'm going to demonstrate, Benazzi and I are now going to phone TIS, and so we know the number is 131450. We have a TIS code. Nobody should be copying this down. This is AMPARO's TIS code. Get your own. And that then we will just demonstrate connecting to the interpreter, because I really want you to see how easy it is to do. Okay. Now, and I suppose bearing in mind that it is after hours. And of course, I haven't gone ahead and shown you how I've pre-briefed and known what language Benazzi speaks. No. Sorry, I was talking and that had gone through. So I'll start that again.
Phone interpreting service account. Call 8 is on 1-800-131-450. To register for ATIS, please access your TIS online account. For information on how TIS National handles your personal information, please read our privacy notice located on our website at tisnational.gov.au. Which language should the interpreter speak?
Burundi.
Thanks. You've asked for Kirundi. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you already registered with TIS as an agency client?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have an ATIS account number?
No.
All right. Please wait while we contact an operator.
mwategerezaho gakenya igihe turimo tubashakira umuntu ari bubafashe.
I was wanting a Kurundi interpreter, please. Jenny? Banatsi? Banatsi? No, they're with me. Thank you.
We can't hear the audio of Tiz.
Can you hear that? It's
No,
just music. At all.
not at all. Are you able to put it on speaker? Is
I
it
am.
on speaker?
Yeah, it is. No?
No,
So
I
if
can't
you-
hear.
Okay, if you can't hear, I may as well hang up.
We heard some parts of before, but we can't hear any music right now. Let's see when the interpreter comes on.
Thanks, Ellen. Sorry.
Holding up again. If you're
Thank you. Hello? Hello? Oh, Albert, my name's Jenny. I have a person with me called Vanatsi, and I'm wanting to just talk to her about a pre-planning meeting for the NDIS. So I'm going to be asking her some questions about her goals and what she hopes to achieve through her NDIS plan. Is that okay? Okay. Well, we might just start. Would you like to introduce yourself to Vanatsi? Hello?
Jambo. Mwiriwe. Oh, ni vyiza. Murakoze.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
All right. Okay. So Vanatsi, I'd first like to ask you about what supports you have now, such as family, friends, or service providers.
Ubu mu muryango ndafise umushingantahe wanje aramfasha ivyo ashoboye mu rugo cane cane kubera bivanye n'ingorane mfise hari ibintu vyinshi ntagishoboye gukora aramfasha. Hanyuma ndafise abana bakuze nabo baramfasha, ariko ntabwo ari cane kubera ko baja ku mashure bose, abandi bakaja ku buzi. Ahanini umugabo wanje niwe mbona afasha cane ku muryango. Ngira ngo ubanze uvuge ivy'umuryango hama ku bijanye n'abandi bantu ndakubwira.
Those three school and work, but usually I get assistance and support from my husband.
Okay. All right. Albert, I'm going to let you know that that's actually a training session I'm just doing now, and I'm going to stop it. But thank you for your time, well, I will hang up now. Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay. How was he, Vanazzi?
It's good, quite good.
Quite good. And see, I can ask Vanazzi because she speaks English, and but a way if you're working with somebody and you were concerned about the quality, the accuracy of the interpreter, one way you might pick up on some cues is if the person wasn't responding with answers to questions that you would expect, or sorry, responding with answers you would expect. There may be a look of confusion on the person's behalf. And sometimes there's a family member with you who may have English and also the spoken language, and they'll tell you they're not accurate. Okay. I'm conscious that we need to stop now so that we can answer some questions. As I say, there's a lot of tips in the presentation that we'll send you. Ellen, also, there's some great tips I know in the PHN website around working with interpreters. TIS National has some videos also. So there's really, I think, when we live in such a multicultural country, I think we all have a responsibility to know how to work effectively with interpreters, because it's really a critical part of cultural responsiveness. Okay, Ellen, do you want to give us any questions, or will I just read them from the chat?
Yep, there's Anna's question. Are there any disability services out there to help support participants from CALD backgrounds that are new arrivals to the country prior to being approved or registered with NDIS?
So in terms of you're a new arrival living with disability, you can't yet access the NDIS because you've got to demonstrate the permanence and significance and so forth. So you're asking, the question is there any disability services available in the meantime? It's a great question. And what has happened with the introduction of the NDIS, well, it's not introduction, it's been around for a few years now, is that a lot of those services then were, I don't know whether they lost funding or that it's that thing between the state government and the federal government, which funds the NDIS, and the state government shifting the responsibility. This is some of the talk I hear from Maureen. So there would, well, I don't know. I'm not going to say I know exactly the answer to that.
I think depends on what type of disability service
True.
they need, but currently I can see like some other services are helping people while supporting them to access NDIS, or while referring them to organizations like us to help them to access NDIS.
Okay, so Anna's saying reason being is we've had to rely on charity donated equipment, and sometimes families have had to share equipment between families. Okay, so for assistive technology and so forth. So again, yes, I can't really answer that, Anna, and say, well, you can go to this service or that service. I mean, we refer people to QCSS, but that's more for home support. That's not for assistive technology. There is another organisation now called Ability First, which is new, and it may be able to help. So we can put that, send a link to that, Alan, later. Mm-hmm. So they may be somebody who can assist. Yeah.
There is also, I mean, when a newly arrived refugee enters the country, for example, in Brisbane, the Mata Refugee Health Service, as through their assessment, they start the process. So they try and help, but it is still donated equipment. They're not able to tap in directly into NDIS equipment, services, or support.
No.
So generally, the Refugee Health Service will start through the health assessment that they do.
Okay. The question there, can you please clarify, is TIS available free to all allied health professionals or just those registered with NDIS? Ellen, do you?
So if it is, if they are NDIS, then they can tap into the NDIS. If it is non-NDIS, then please read the link that I have sent. It's a pilot program, so there are LGAs that have been approved, for example, Brisbane and Logan. There are some allied health that unfortunately are not included, for example, a dentist, dietitian or dietetics educator are not included, but all the others are. So there's quite an exhaustive list. Have a look on the website. So if you are accessing NDIS, then that is already covered. If it is a non-NDIS, then you have free allied health interpreters in pilot LGAs. Please read the details on the website that I have sent the link to.
Any other questions? Did I miss?
No, Patricia had made some comments about the importance of interpreters and how they should be trained, encouraged to have empathy and assertiveness. Patricia, do you want to say anything else? Any other questions? I see Margaret is online. Margaret, do you want to say anything?
Might be able to say anything if they're muted.
Thanks, Ellen. No, I don't really have anything to say. I think the questions have been very good, particularly around what to do when someone is newly arrived. Certainly having a chat to the settlement agency and seeing whether or not there is something that can be offered by specifically approaching because of that particular case to Home Affairs and requesting support. Often that needs to be done, and often that takes quite a bit of energy for the settlement agency to engage with Department of Home Affairs separately, but they can advocate for very specific cases on occasions. And certainly getting the public hospital system engaged. With some parts of Queensland, when we're seeing the information come through before people arrive, we sometimes are aware of what needs to happen so we can start preparing some of these things. And you're right, wheelchair access is seriously a problem. And I definitely think we can do better for people with severe disability. And it's something that we've raised regularly with Department of Home Affairs. Some of the stuff is really obvious stuff, and it's very sad that people have to suffer.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, I wasn't aware of this situation that you've typed in. I have to admit, we don't work with new arrivals. Most of the people we work with are generally been here at least a minimum of 2 years and often 5 years and longer. That would be tricky for me to do. I signed off.
Okay.
Because we're sending it to everyone, will that be all right? They'll yeah, so you'll see that there's the PHN, and then we just had a summary slide of the enablers, and yeah, basically, thank you whoever did that. So there's the AMPARO website, and I did just put a link into the MOOS being the Multicultural Engagement Worker project, where if you do have people you're working with, as I say, we don't work with new arrivals. People have come in the first 12 months because they do have caseworkers through the settlement agencies, unless it was, certainly reach out to us for advice, and possibly we are able to assist in some way. So, yeah, and there's the Centre for Ethnicity and Health, where that video came, is also really good, and the FECA checklist around CALD friendly feedback and complaints. And there's cultural responsiveness training through Brisbane South PHN, and then QCOS. That they have that one there on working with interpreters, which you can do at your own pace. So I'd recommend that also. And thank you for the opportunity for both Venanzi and I to present to you tonight, and I hope it was of benefit to you, and yeah, all the best.
Thank you.